There's a tiredness with no clear reason. Nothing bad happened. Sleep doesn't fix it. The real cause? Worrying what people think of you. Did they judge that? How do I compare? What's being said about me right now? Carl Jung spent his life studying this. His answer, the real problem isn't being disconnected from others. It's being disconnected from yourself, because all your energy goes into how people see you. He called it living in projection, being a reflection of others' expectations instead of who you really are. He believed it was the top cause of mental suffering. Today, how to pull that energy back and use it to become who you actually are. Stick around. The last part, individuation, is the most important step anyone can take. 1. The exhausting weight of the persona. Jung gave a name to the mask everyone wears. He called it the persona, from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. The persona is not fake exactly. It is functional. It is the adapted version of yourself you present to the world, appropriate for work, for family, for social situations, for the 1,000 contexts that require some version of conformity to function. The persona is necessary. Jung was clear about this. You cannot walk through the world with zero adaptation, showing your rawest, unfiltered self in every context. That would be its own kind of psychological damage. But here is the danger Jung identified, and it is the danger almost everyone in the modern world has fallen into without realizing it. When you forget that the persona is a mask, when you begin to believe that the mask is the entirety of who you are, something begins to die underneath it. You start making decisions not from your own values, but from calculations about how the decision will be perceived. You start feeling emotions not as direct responses to your life, but filtered through anticipation of how those emotions will be judged. You start to lose access, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to the question of what you actually want, because the question has been replaced entirely by what would look right. This is the exhaustion with no obvious cause. 2. Why other people's opinions feel like facts. This is the mechanism that keeps people trapped in this exhausting cycle, and Jung understood it with unusual precision. When someone judges you, disapproves of a decision, criticizes a choice, raises an eyebrow at something you've said, that judgment does not feel like information. It feels like truth. And this is one of the strangest, most consequential illusions of the human mind. A single person's opinion, formed in seconds, based on limited information, filtered through their own history and biases and current mood, somehow lands in your psyche with the weight of objective fact. Why? Jung's answer involves something he called projection, though this is a slightly different use of the word than the persona discussion. When you were small, and this is universal, not specific to bad parenting or unusual circumstances, your sense of your own worth was built, almost entirely, through the reflection you received from others. A child does not yet have an internal compass for their own value. That compass is built, piece by piece, through the reactions of the people around them. Approval felt like safety. Disapproval felt like danger, sometimes existential danger, given how dependent children are on the adults around them. This system made sense when you were small and genuinely dependent on others for survival. But for most people, it never gets updated. The adult nervous system continues running the child's program. Approval still registers as safety. Disapproval still registers as danger. Even though you are now, in every practical sense, capable of surviving someone's disapproval completely intact. Jung's work on the psyche was largely about identifying these outdated programs and consciously updating them. And the update required here is one of the most important a person can make. 3. The shadow you've been running from is the doorway inward. Jung's most famous and most misunderstood concept is the shadow. Most people who have heard the term think of it simply as the bad parts of yourself, the anger, the jealousy, the selfishness, the desires you're ashamed of. This is partially correct, but misses the deeper point. The shadow, in Jung's framework, is everything about yourself that you have pushed out of conscious awareness because it did not fit the persona you were building. This includes the parts that feel bad, the rage, the cruelty, the cowardice. But it also includes parts that might be entirely positive. Talents you suppressed because they made others uncomfortable. Desires you abandoned because they didn't fit the story others had for you. Strength you hid because it threatened someone you loved. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the unlived, unexamined parts of yourself that got exiled in the process of building a persona acceptable to others. And here is Jung's crucial insight, the one that connects directly to detachment and inward focus. As long as you are entirely focused on managing how others perceive you, you cannot do the work of facing your shadow. 4. The difference between isolation and individuation. This distinction matters enormously, and getting it wrong has hurt many people who tried to apply Jung's ideas without understanding them fully. Some people, when they encounter the idea of focusing inward and detaching from others, interpret this as license to withdraw entirely, to cut off relationships, to stop caring what anyone thinks in the dismissive sense, to retreat into isolation as a form of self-protection. This is not what Jung meant, and it produces a different, and often worse, kind of psychological damage. Isolation, Jung observed, is often just another form of running not toward yourself, but away from the discomfort of genuine connection. It can look like independence while actually being a defense against intimacy, against being truly seen, against the vulnerability that real relationship requires. Individuation, Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming your true, integrated self, is something entirely different. Individuation does not require withdrawing from people. It requires withdrawing your dependence on people's approval as the source of your psychological stability. These sound similar, but are fundamentally different. The individuated person can be deeply, genuinely connected to others. They can love fully, engage fully, participate fully in relationships and community. 5. Why your inner world has been neglected your entire life. Jung made an observation about modern life that has only become more relevant since his death. He believed that the external world, the world of achievement, productivity, social position, visible success, receives almost all of the attention modern people are taught to give. We are educated extensively about how to function in the outer world, how to get a job, how to manage money, how to present ourselves, how to navigate social situations, how to build a career. We receive almost no education about the inner world, how to understand our own emotions when they are confusing, how to interpret our dreams, which Jung considered one of the most direct lines of communication from the unconscious, how to recognize our own patterns and where they originated, how to distinguish our authentic desires from the desires we absorbed from family, culture, and the constant pressure of comparison. This imbalance, massive education in the outer world, almost none in the inner, produces adults who are highly capable of functioning externally and almost completely illiterate in their own internal landscape. And this illiteracy has a specific cost. When you do not know your own inner world, you cannot navigate it. You experience emotions as mysterious weather systems happening to you, rather than meaningful information you can interpret. You make decisions based on inherited scripts you've never examined, mistaking them for your own genuine preferences. You feel a persistent low-level sense of disconnection from your own life, even when, by every external measure, things are going well. Jung's prescription was not therapy in the conventional sense, though therapy can be part of it. It was a deliberate, ongoing practice of inner attention, treating your dreams as meaningful rather than dismissing them, sitting with difficult emotions long enough to understand what they are actually about, rather than immediately distracting from them. Examining your reactions for patterns, noticing when you are responding to the present situation versus reacting from something much older. Making space, actual, scheduled, protected space, for reflection that has no productive output other than increased self-understanding. 6. The voices in your head are not all yours. This is one of Jung's most practically useful insights, and almost nobody applies it. The internal commentary that runs constantly, the critic that tells you you're not good enough, the anxious voice that catastrophizes every uncertain situation, the perfectionist that demands impossible standards. Most people assume this voice is simply them, their own authentic perspective on themselves. Jung's work on the psyche suggests something different. Much of this internal commentary is actually internalized voices from your history, a parent's criticism, absorbed so early and so thoroughly that it now runs automatically, in your own internal voice, sounding exactly like your own thought. A cultural message about worth and productivity, installed so deeply that questioning it feels like questioning reality itself. A teacher's dismissal, a peer's mockery, a sibling's comparison, all of it absorbed and now running on autoplay, indistinguishable from your genuine perspective, unless you specifically learn to distinguish it. This is part of what Jung meant by becoming conscious. Not simply being awake and aware in the ordinary sense, but developing the capacity to examine your own thoughts and ask, whose voice is this, really? When the critic activates, is this voice helping you grow, Or is this an old recording of someone who was never actually trying to help you? When the anxiety catastrophizes, is this genuine risk assessment? Or is this an old fear pattern from a situation that has nothing to do with your current reality? When the perfectionist demands more, is this your authentic standard? Or is this an inherited belief that your worth is conditional on achievement? The work of detaching from others and focusing inward requires this specific skill. The ability to sort through the internal voices and identify which ones are genuinely yours and which ones were installed by people who, in many cases, are no longer even in your life, but whose voice continues to run the show from somewhere inside your own mind. 7. Why comparison is psychological theft. Jung never used this exact phrase, but the concept runs through his work consistently. Comparison, the constant measuring of your life against the lives of others, is one of the most effective ways the psyche keeps itself trapped in the outward-facing mode. Every time you compare your timeline to someone else's, your achievements to someone else's, your appearance, your relationships, your career to someone else's, you are, in that moment, completely outside yourself. You have left the only territory where your actual life is happening, your own internal experience, your own specific path, your own particular set of circumstances and possibilities, and you have gone to live temporarily inside someone else's story instead. This is not a metaphor. It is a precise description of where your attention is during the act of comparison. And attention, Jung believed, is one of the most precious resources a person has. What you give your attention to is, in a very real sense, what you are building your life out of. Every minute spent in comparison is a minute not spent in genuine self-encounter. Every hour spent monitoring someone else's progress is an hour not spent attending to your own actual development. This is the theft, not theft by someone else. Theft by your own habitual mind, stealing your attention away from the only place your real life can actually be lived, and handing it over to an endless, ultimately meaningless project of measuring yourself against people whose entire context, history, and circumstances are different from your own. The detachment Jung is pointing toward includes detachment from this specific habit. Not because other people's lives don't matter, because your attention, redirected inward, is the only resource you have for actually building the life that is yours to build. 8. The dialogue with yourself that almost nobody has learned to have. Jung practiced something he called active imagination, a deliberate, structured way of having genuine dialogue with the different parts of yourself. This sounds strange to modern ears, accustomed to thinking of the self as a single, unified thing. But Jung's understanding of the psyche was far more complex. He believed the self contains multiple aspects: the persona, the shadow, what he called the anima or animus, and other archetypal patterns, and that psychological health requires these different aspects to be in conscious relationship with each other, rather than locked in unconscious conflict. Most people experience internal conflict as confusing, even tormenting. A part of them wants one thing, another part wants something else, and the resulting tension feels like simple anxiety or indecision. Jung's approach was to make this internal conflict conscious and explicit. To actually sit, in silence, with a journal, in genuine reflective space, and let the different voices speak. What does the ambitious part of me want? What does the part of me that's afraid actually fear, specifically? What does the part of me that feels guilty about wanting more actually believe about what I deserve? This is not therapy performance. It is genuine internal investigation, and it requires exactly the kind of attention that is unavailable to someone whose entire psychological budget is spent managing external perception. The detachment from others creates the space for this dialogue to happen. Without it, without genuinely redirecting attention inward, the internal voices remain a confusing background noise rather than a source of real information about who you actually are and what you actually need.